for coming to see me. That's not the first time I've heard that. Right, yeah. We have a special guest, a special, in case you didn't know. Yeah, who was here 6 years ago? Because 6 years ago, a certain Mr. Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party. And the great thing was, we announced it here because it was on the same day as the Wigan Diggers Festival. And so that was fantastic honour for that to happen. Well, I never expected that we would be introducing him actually on the stage, so but we are going to do. So he's going to come up and say a few words, and I'm sure you'll make him welcome. I'll just check he's ready. Oh, I think we're good to go. Yes, so after 6 years, he's coming here. He's had a massive groundswell of support like people from yourselves. So, will you please welcome to Wigan Diggers Festival, the Right Honourable Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me here today to the Diggers Festival. The Diggers are an inspiration, and that inspiration inspires all of us in lots that we do. But first of all, I want to say a big thank you to the Bakers Union and all those that have organised today's event. The Bakers Union has fought for union recognition, supported its members and is expanding its membership. That surely has to be the right way to go. We campaign to get particularly young people into the trade union membership in order that we can defeat fire and rehire, we can defeat the attacks on wages and conditions that this government is now forcing upon all of us. We're not going to do it on our own, we're only ever going to be able to do it together. This commemoration of Gerard Winstanley and the Diggers is quite amazing, and I can't think of discussing what Winstanley went through and what he stood for and what he campaigned for without thinking of my great friend, the late great Tony Benn, who he and I often discussed the whole process of the English Civil War. And most of our children, if they ever hear anything about the English Civil War, only hear that there was an interregnum when there was a Commonwealth and then the King was back and all was well again. They don't discuss what really happened, the way in which Parliament was under attack by the King, parliamentary forces went to civil war and ultimately defeated the powers of royalty. But within that process, within that campaign by the parliamentary forces, was a huge debate. The debates in Putney Church between Cromwell and his forces and the forces of the Levellers, were led by John Lilburn, were very important. That was a debate about the nature of society and the nature of democracy and so much else. But Winstanley took it quite a few stages further, because the parliamentary forces were nervous about attacking land ownership, nervous about attacking the principle of monarchy, and frankly quite nervous about what would come afterwards. The Diggers, Winstanley and others, challenged the whole notion of land ownership, challenged the whole notion of property rights, and without being aware of the word, because it wasn't invented at the time, it hadn't been thought of, they were actually early socialists who wanted to ensure that the earth was genuinely a common treasury for all, not something to be exploited by the few. And so it is important that our young people in school and college and university understand the radical history of this country. It's not all about kings and queens and wars and empires and colonies. It's also about the struggles of ordinary people, extraordinary ordinary people, who brought about these fundamental changes, who later on went on to unite together in class struggle to form trade unions. And those trade unions and that struggle brought about ultimately free education, gave us the National Health Service, and gave us an awful lot of other things. But all those things are permanently under threat whilst we live in a society dominated by a wealthy minority and the current government, a government determined to make the inequality even worse within our society. The COVID pandemic has created billionaires and paupers at the same time. It's given billions to Big Pharma, it's given billions to private medicine and many others, and it's left many more in stress and in poverty. And what we've got coming now is a reduction in public spending, is an increase in national insurance without creating a national care service, and an attack on wages and conditions through the disgusting thing known as fire and rehire. So what do? Do we sit back and do nothing about it? Or do we unite together? Unite together as a Labour movement. Unite together as a Labour movement to not just defend our National Health Service, but extend our National Health Service. And if the NHS cannot cope with the number of patients it has at the present time, and it can't, then the private medicine service ought to become part of the National Health Service and not be there for only those that can afford it. These are the principles on which we have to operate. But there are also other lessons from the English Civil War, from the diggers and from the levellers, and those are about our treatment of the natural world and the environment. Even then, they were concerned about enclosure of common land, about the loss of livelihood of peasant farmers, those that lived from the common land, and the loss of that land. The enclosure system got much worse in succeeding centuries. But they were also concerned about the environmental destruction going on around them. We now face the consequences of the craziness of free market economics that thinks you can forever drag everything out of the earth with no consequences. We have global warming, we have a loss of biodiversity, we have an increase in pollution, we have a huge danger to the existence of all of us. And so it isn't going to be free market greenwash solutions. It's got to be investment for a green, sustainable economy and the creation of green, sustainable jobs to go with it, not the enrichment of the richest within our society. So there is so much we can learn from and be inspired with what the diggers taught us and those that went before us taught us. And in a world where, sadly, the rise of the far right and racism is on the march, we challenge racism by challenging the historical conflict that taught some people they are superior to others. That's how the slave trade was sustained. That is how anti-Semitism grew in the 19th and 20th century. That is how racism sustains itself. So we study our history differently. We oppose racism in all its forms. And I finish on this. I've just come from Liverpool, where there was a huge demonstration against the holding of the Electronic Warfare Arms Convention in Liverpool. And I simply say this, that if you sell arms around the world, if you sell electronic surveillance equipment, if you sell equipment that can target civilians and hospitals and schools and kill people, as the Saudi attack on Yemen is doing, as so many other wars are doing, then don't be surprised if you create the terrorists and the refugee flows and the misery and the wars of tomorrow. And so it is no good complaining about human rights abuses in Yemen, for example, but there are many other examples, if we are supplying the weapons in the first place that brings about that. So it is about controlling the arms trade, but it's also about thinking of the brilliance and skills that are there among so many people who are making things they possibly don't even want to make, but those skills could be doing so much more. Real security is peace, is a job, is health, is education, is clean water, is clean air, and it is hope for our children and the next generation. And so I spend my time supporting campaigns and campaigning and supporting community organising campaigns, because fundamentally political change comes about from what we do in our own communities to mobilise people and win social justice. That's what the Project for Justice and Peace, which we established last year, is achieving, and we're working on that all over. And to me, it's an absolute pleasure to be able to be here in Wigan at the Diggers Festival to thank you for what you do, thank you for the inspiration it is, but above all, feel that strength, that unity of a crowd together, of what we can achieve to bring about a better future for the next and future generations. Wigan, thank you.
Let's hear it again for the Honourable Jeremy Corbyn! Solidarity, thanks for coming. That was fantastic. Couldn't have said it better myself. That was absolutely brilliant. I hope that we've just got that fitted in and he couldn't have timed it better. So absolute honour for him to be here 6 years after he was Labour leader. Give it up one more time for Jeremy Corbyn! Thank you. Cheers, right. There you go. We're going to have to pass you over to the other stage now. We've got some